Have you ever wondered why your loudest prayers go unanswered, but your quietest belief come true? What if I told you that the greatest power to manifest anything doesn't roar, it whispers? In this video, you'll discover how the law works in silence, and how mastering this one secret can change your entire reality. Years ago, I found myself struggling deeply, not in public, but in the silence of my own soul. I desired a breakthrough in my life, one that seemed impossible by the standards of logic. I had spoken all the affirmations, read every holy book, declared my desires aloud, and still nothing changed. One evening I stopped. I didn't say another word. I closed my eyes, entered that sacred stillness, and imagined the scene as fulfilled. I did not speak of it again. I did not try to convince anyone, not even myself. I simply assumed it quietly and lived in the end. And in the days that followed, life rearranged itself in such divine precision, it was as if the world had conspired in total silence to give me exactly what I had seen. That's when I knew. The law works in silence. It is not the loud asking, but the still believing that creates. The power of silent assumption is far more potent than the noise of begging. Creation does not speak in noise, it moves in stillness. Your loudest words carry no power unless the silent assumption behind them is in harmony. Manifest through stillness, not struggle. The still mind is not empty, it is focused. When you still your surface, your inner image speaks louder to the universe than any external action. Everything you see around you is only a shadow of your inner world. Inner speech creates reality. But it is not what you say aloud that shapes the world. It is what you dare to assume silently when no one is watching. The outer is dead. The inner is alive. It is from this hidden, unseen inner chamber that all things are born. A man who declares, "I am rich," out of fear, has no power. But one who assumes abundance, in silence, with calm certainty, bends the laws of reality around him. Words spoken in fear are weak. Silent belief is unshakable. How to manifest without speaking begins with knowing that speech is symbolic. The real change happens in consciousness. The law responds not to noise, but to identity. When you believe in silence, that you already are the thing you desire, it becomes yours. Begging produces delay. Faith in silence produces results. You are not a beggar, you are a creator. The more you try to make something happen, the more you affirm its absence. The womb of reality is your imagination, and it functions best in quiet. Do not tell others what you're manifesting. Do not ask them if they think it's possible. They do not live in your consciousness. The silent creation law means the moment you've assumed it in stillness, it is already done. Let no one interfere with what you've already birthed in the invisible. Stillness and the creative force are one. In stillness, you align with that unseen dimension from which all visible things come. You do not fight your way into success. You rest into it. Not passive laziness, but spiritual stillness, a calm knowing that you are the embodiment of what you desire. The unseen creation secrets are not complex, they are just quiet. The paradox of power is this: when you stop trying, the law begins acting. When you stop looking for signs, they appear. When you stop forcing, things unfold. That is how the law works quietly, not with struggle, but with divine orchestration. To be still and assume is to place your order with the universe, without anxiety, without effort, without doubt. As you persist in your silent power of imagination, the world bends without resistance. Things change, people shift, events align, not because you made it happen, but because you held the new version of yourself in silence. The outside reflects the vibrational silence technique you practiced. It must obey the assumption, for the law is perfect. Creation does not operate in the noise of the world. It functions silently, beyond sound, beyond effort, beyond explanation. When I speak of creation, I do not mean the outer movement of matter or the things you can touch, handle, or point at in your physical world. I am speaking of that which precedes all form, that invisible realm where cause is planted and silently unfolds. What the world calls reality is only a shadow, and that shadow is cast by a man's inner state, a state often assumed without words, without gestures, without a single sound. Silence is the true language of manifestation, and he who understands this mystery becomes a master over the seen and unseen. The greatest acts of creation are always done in silence. The seed falls into the earth without announcement. The child forms in the womb without fanfare. The sun rises each morning not by shouting itself into existence, but by the steady, quiet certainty of cosmic law. So it is with you. You are not here to speak your world into being with noise and repetition, but to align yourself with the feeling of the wish fulfilled and let it unfold silently. The law works in silence because silence is the surest sign of knowing. When you truly know something is yours, you do not speak of it with desperation. You rest in the conviction of already having received. Many try to change their world by fighting the outer, by pushing, struggling, and forcing things into shape. They speak to others about their desires, they debate, they try to convince, they write them down, chant them, repeat them over and over again. But unless the internal movement, the quiet assumption has taken place, all these external efforts are meaningless. They are but noise covering the real work which is always done in the quiet chamber of consciousness. The man who is still within himself and assumes his desire is already his, without uttering a word, has more creative power than 1,000 who cry aloud but doubt in secret. To understand the power of silence, one must first understand the nature of imagination. Imagination is not daydreaming, it is not fantasy. It is the doorway to the creative process. And imagination works best in stillness. You do not need to shout in your mind or emotionally strain to picture what you want. You only need to quietly embody the state of the desired result. Take it on, wear it like a garment, feel it as if it were already real, and do so in complete silence. There is no need to announce it to the world. In fact, the more silent the assumption, the more potent the creation. The silent assumption goes undisturbed by contradiction, unchallenged by the noise of opinions, and unshaken by the doubts of others. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of inner knowing. When you know a thing, really know it, you do not have to tell anyone. You do not even have to tell yourself. You walk differently. You carry a new tone in your inner world. You respond from a different state. And that new state, though invisible, begins to crystallize into your world. You begin to attract, not because you are asking, but because you are being. This being, born in silence, is the root of manifestation. What you are in silence speaks louder than what you say aloud. Most people fear silence. They think nothing is happening. They think silence is void, but silence is pregnant. Silence is active. It is the space in which all things take root. Just as soil accepts the seed quietly and produces life without noise, so does consciousness accept the assumption and produce experience without effort. When you enter the stillness, you are stepping into the most sacred part of creation. That is where power lives. That is where the law begins to respond. The moment you assume your desire fulfilled in silence, you have set into motion the unseen mechanics of manifestation. You may not see results immediately, but that matters not. You do not rush a seed in the ground. You do not dig it up every hour to see if it is growing. You trust the process because you understand that life works beneath the surface, in the invisible, in the quiet. So it is with your desires. Once assumed, they must gestate. And during this gestation period, your only job is to remain still, to hold the feeling, to resist the urge to speak against it, doubt it, or contradict it with your words. The less you speak about it, the more sacred it becomes. And the more sacred, the more certain it is to bloom. Silence also protects your assumption. The spoken word can be subject to interpretation, rejection, or ridicule, but the silent assumption is immune. It exists in the realm of the eternal. It is untouched by other minds, unaffected by other voices. When you place your desire into the womb of silence, it cannot be contaminated. It grows purely, governed only by the faith with which you assumed it. This is why the law works in silence, because silence is the place of true faith. It is easy to speak of a thing. It is much harder to believe in it so deeply that no words are needed. But this is the mastery you must seek, not to speak your world into being through volume, but to birth it through quiet certainty. The man who can do this becomes a true creator. He does not need to convince others of his power. His life becomes the evidence of his inner silence. The inner world is the only reality. To believe otherwise is to be deceived by the illusion of the senses. Everything you now see and experience in the outer world is but a projection of a state you once accepted within. The chair you sit on, the house you live in, the relationship you are part of, the success or failure you observe, all of these began as a state of being in your own imagination. What appears as external and objective is only the echo of a subjective choice. The world is not a cause, it is a mirror. And what it reflects is not your words, not your efforts, not your actions alone, but your inner assumptions. The quiet feelings and convictions you hold when no one is listening. There is nothing more misleading than the belief that reality begins outside of you. The one who is unaware of his inner world is constantly rearranging circumstances, people, and events in the hope of achieving peace or change. But no change is everlasting unless it comes from within. You can move from one city to another, change professions, change relationships, or alter your appearance, but unless you have shifted the self-concept that birthed the former experiences, you will only recreate the same pattern in a different disguise. The outer world is plastic, molded by the potter's hand, and that hand is your own imagination. The error most people make is seeking proof before belief. They want to see signs before they assume. But this is a reversal of the law. The law does not respond to outer sight. It responds to inner assumption. Your feeling of being already in possession, already transformed, already complete, this is the seed of creation. And it must be planted in the soil of silence. For it is not enough to say, I want this, or I hope for that. These are wishes, not assumptions. The inner world is shaped by what you accept as real. And what you accept as real will eventually harden into fact. But it must first be accepted internally, in the unseen dimension of your consciousness. What you are conscious of being is always greater than what you claim aloud. You may speak of success, but if you feel unworthy, the feeling will dominate. You may declare love, but if you harbor resentment, your experience will reflect division. The outer is always responding not to your declarations, but to your vibration. And vibration is born of feeling. Words without feeling are powerless, but feeling, even unspoken, is a command to the universe. That is why your inner speech creates reality. The conversations you have in the silence of your mind, the thoughts you repeat without speaking, the images you hold when no one is watching, these are the building blocks of the world you experience. Your task is not to change the world, but to observe what the world is telling you about yourself. Each person, each circumstance, each repeated event, they are reflections, not random occurrences. They are reports from your subconscious telling you what you've accepted as truth, even if you're unaware of it. The law is not unjust. It does not punish or reward. It reflects. If your world seems to be repeating the same struggles or disappointments, look not to others for explanation. Look inward. Find the silent assumption, the hidden belief, the unexamined feeling, and there you will discover the cause. When this is truly understood, transformation becomes simple. No longer do you need to convince or persuade. You do not need to fight the outer. You return to the only place where change is possible, your imagination. There you select the state you wish to occupy and you assume it quietly, reverently, persistently. You embody the new identity not with noise but with stillness. You do not explain your process to others. You do not seek approval. You simply accept within yourself that you are already what you wish to be. And because the inner world is the only reality, the outer world must conform. In silence, you can build the life you desire with precision. Without distraction, without interference, you can redesign your concept of self and live from it long before the world acknowledges it. This is not delusion. This is faith in the unseen. And faith is the evidence of things not yet visible. The man who believes only what he sees is limited to the past, but the one who believes what he feels within, regardless of appearances, becomes the master of the future. Every transformation begins with an inner shift. The man who changes his concept of self changes the circumstances of his life. There is no outer barrier so great that it cannot be dissolved by an internal change of being. There is no destiny so fixed that it cannot be rewritten by a new assumption. The moment you realize that your inner world is not only real, but more real than the physical, is the moment you begin to create consciously. What does it mean to live from within? It means to stop reacting to the world as if it has power over you. It means to choose your state and remain faithful to it, even when everything outside tempts you to doubt. It means to turn away from appearances and return to the imaginal act. When you do this, you step into the role of creator, and the world begins to move, adjust, and arrange itself to reflect your inner conviction. There is a fundamental difference between loudly affirming a desire and silently assuming its reality. One is born of effort, the other of faith. You may walk the streets declaring your intention to become wealthy, successful, loved, or healed, and yet see no change. Why? Because the power is not in the noise, but in the still conviction that the thing already is. The man who closes his eyes, withdraws from the senses, and assumes that what he desires is already true, without speaking a single word, has done more to move the world than one who speaks all day but wavers in belief. The assumption in silence is far more powerful than the loudest affirmation because it originates in being rather than wanting. It is not what you say with your lips that transforms the world, but what you say in the temple of your inner self. And what you say there is not always in words. It is a tone, a state, a quiet identification with your aim. If you say, I am healthy, yet in silence you carry the feeling of illness, then illness is what the law responds to, not your verbal declaration, but your dominant state of being. And if you dare to assume in the stillness of your soul that you already are what you desire to be, then the law is set in motion, without effort, without delay, and without noise. The universe listens to feeling, not volume. Feeling is the language of creation. When an assumption is felt as true, it becomes a command to the unseen forces. This is not about convincing anyone, not even yourself, through repetition. It is about entering the state and dwelling there, quietly, confidently, without the need to advertise. The loud affirmation often masks uncertainty. The silent assumption, on the other hand, reflects inner stability. When you no longer feel the need to declare your desire, it's because you have already received it in consciousness. The most potent transformations occur when nothing is spoken aloud. They happen in that silent moment when a man sees himself differently, not because someone told him to, but because he decided to accept a new identity. And he accepts it not by repeating phrases, but by wearing the state like a second skin. In the inner world, to assume is to create. And that assumption, when adopted in silence, becomes the seed from which all visible experience grows. You are always assuming something, whether you realize it or not. Most people assume lack, failure, delay, or conflict, and they do so without ever speaking of it. Their inner conversations are saturated with fear, doubt, and worry, They do not need to say, I believe I will fail, for their emotional state already declares it. But the same law that responds to negative assumptions will respond just as faithfully to the positive. The difference lies not in the effort, but in the direction of belief. Assume success quietly, and success must come. Assume love without saying a word, and love will find you. Assume freedom in stillness, and chains will break. There is a great sacredness to quiet creation. It is not for public display. When you truly accept a thing as yours, you no longer need to talk about it, you live from it. You walk as if it were true, speak as if it were accomplished, move through the world as one who already possesses it. This is not arrogance, this is inner alignment. And it is done best in silence, for silence protects the seed of assumption from the winds of doubt, fear, and contradiction. The outer man seeks validation, evidence, reassurance. He looks for signs, seeks agreement, and tries to force the world into compliance. But the inner man, who knows the law, works in silence. He chooses his state, enters it, and waits in confidence. He does not disturb the process with noise. He does not demand timelines or explanations. He knows that once assumed, the thing must come, for it already exists in consciousness. And what exists in consciousness will eventually clothe itself in fact. Consider the one who desires financial freedom. He may declare affirmations day and night. He may speak them aloud, write them down, share them with friends. Yet if he continues to feel poor, if he imagines bills, fears lack, and identifies with scarcity in silence, no change will come. But if he stops the noise, goes within, and assumes quietly that he already lives in wealth, sees himself operating from abundance, feels the freedom it brings, then the change begins. Without a word spoken, he has shifted the cause, and the effect must follow. You need not announce your transformation. The oak tree does not announce its growth to the forest. It simply grows. So must you. Let the world discover your change by watching the fruit of your silent assumption. Say nothing, assume everything. That is how the law works, not through the loud demand, but through the silent knowing. And in that silence, creation obeys. The law does not respond to noise. It does not answer to pleading, effort, or repetition. It is moved by identity. You do not receive what you ask for, you receive what you are. If your inner world is filled with the feeling of already being the person who possesses the thing desired, then that feeling becomes the seed of your experience. But if you are constantly seeking, constantly begging, constantly talking about what you wish to have, then you are unconsciously affirming its absence. The law hears not the spoken word, but the unspoken assumption. You may cry for change, but if in silence you feel lack, that is what will continue to unfold. You must stop trying to get and begin being. The one who begs for love is unaware that their very request pushes it away. To beg is to say, I do not have, and the law faithfully reflects that internal state. You cannot pretend on the surface and hope for a different harvest than what you feel beneath. When you desire something, you must become its embodiment in the unseen. If you desire companionship, become love in the silence of your imagination. See yourself already loved. Feel yourself already cherished. Walk with the inner knowing that you are chosen. In doing so, you do not attract love by asking, you attract it by being it. This is where most fail, because they believe that speaking something aloud is enough. They believe that activity is creativity. But the law is not impressed by noise. It waits for identity to stabilize. You may declare, I am successful, yet feel inferior in silence. You may affirm, I am healthy, while harboring an inner image of illness. These conflicting signals create delay. The law cannot respond to duality. It responds only to the dominant assumption. And the dominant assumption is always rooted in feeling, not in performance. When a man begins to understand that life mirrors what he is, not what he wants, everything changes. He no longer seeks external signs. He stops explaining his desires to others. He withdraws from the world not to escape it, but to reorder his inner being. He becomes quiet, still, composed, not because he is weak, but because he has discovered that all power is born in silence. In the stillness, he forms a new concept of self, not through effort, but through surrender. He lets go of the need to ask, and in that letting go, he becomes. The law is always listening, but not to your words. It listens to your self-concept. And your self-concept is shaped by what you believe to be true in the silence. What you say to yourself in those invisible moments before sleep, what you feel when no one is looking, what you assume in the privacy of thought, these are the creators of your world. The law does not judge, it simply reflects. If you feel abundant, even while your pockets are empty, you will soon witness the outer reflection of inner wealth. If you feel powerful, while circumstances scream otherwise, the world will rearrange to match your inner conviction. That is why the man who understands the law no longer begs. He no longer pleads. He no longer speaks of his desires as if they are distant. He assumes the identity of one who already possesses the desire. He speaks, if at all, from the place of fulfillment, not longing. And more often than not, he says nothing, because he knows that once the assumption is made and the feeling accepted, the manifestation is inevitable. He trusts the process of the unseen. The reason you attract what you are is because consciousness is cause. Your world is your consciousness objectified. If you are conscious of lack, you will see it everywhere. If you are conscious of success, it will find you in places you never expected. This is not magic, it is law, and the law does not fail. You cannot deceive it with positive talk while maintaining negative assumptions. You must change the assumption itself, and you do so by shifting your feeling of being, not by speaking louder, not by trying harder, but by stepping into the state internally and living from it. You must stop trying to manifest by pushing against reality and begin manifesting by yielding to identity. Stop asking and start assuming. Stop talking and start being. Assume in silence the thing already accomplished, and the law will work out the details. When you do this, you no longer feel the need to check for signs or ask when it will come. You know it must come because it is already yours in the only place that matters, within. And once it is yours within, the world cannot withhold it. The world is powerless against the assumption held in silence. The act of creation is a private one. It does not require an audience. It does not demand agreement, and it certainly does not wait for validation. The womb of reality, which is your own imagination, functions best when untouched by the noise of the world. It is in the secrecy of your inner chamber that your true work is done. The outer world is not the workshop of creation, it is merely the stage upon which your inner assumptions play out. To constantly share your desires with others, to seek their approval or permission, is to expose the seed of your creation to winds that may scatter it. In silence, that seed takes root. In privacy, it gathers strength. In stillness, it begins to bloom. You do not need to justify your desires to anyone, nor must you explain your visions. What you are assuming in consciousness is yours and yours alone. It is sacred. It is delicate in its beginning stages, like the first flicker of a flame. And what would you say of a man who shows his candle to the wind, expecting it to survive? Such is the one who talks of his desires prematurely, who invites the world into his sacred process. The law responds not to what you declare publicly, but to what you accept privately. The moment you assume a thing in silence, it is already done. You do not need to convince another soul. You do not need to explain why or how. The moment you feel it real, the creative process has begun, and the world around you must bend to reflect your inner shift. This is not philosophy, it is law, and law is impartial. It does not ask who else believes. It does not seek consensus. It responds only to you, to the one who dares to assume in stillness and persist in that assumption without the need for recognition. The man who understands this walks differently. He speaks less of what he wants and lives more from what he has accepted within. He moves through the world with a quiet certainty, not needing to be understood. He knows that the universe is not moved by external chatter, but by internal identification. He doesn't argue, defend, or explain. He simply becomes. And that becoming is done in the silence of consciousness, where no eyes can see and no voices can interfere. When you go within and assume your desire fulfilled, you have performed the only act that matters. From that point forward, your task is not to repeat it aloud, not to shout it from the rooftops, but to guard it, water it, and allow it to grow in the fertile soil of your own awareness. Just as no one watches a seed sprout moment by moment, but simply trust that it will grow beneath the earth, so must you trust your silent assumption to do its perfect work. The outer world may appear unchanged at first, but within something has shifted, and that shift, held consistently, will bear fruit. To share your imaginal act too soon is to invite contradiction. The world, bound by its own logic and conditioned beliefs, may tell you your vision is impossible. And if you are not firmly rooted in your assumption, these voices may disturb the soil in which your creation is growing. That is why privacy is power, not secrecy out of fear, but reverence for the sacred act of becoming. When you no longer need others to believe with you, you demonstrate true belief. When you are content to assume quietly and let the world discover the change on its own, you prove your mastery. There is no need to speak what has already been received in feeling. The man who has assumed his desire fulfilled does not go about announcing it. He does not make a performance of faith. He rests in the awareness that what he is inwardly conscious of must externalize. He leaves the mechanics to the law, the details to divine intelligence. He does not interfere with the process by exposing it prematurely. His silence is not passivity, it is power. For in silence he remains undistracted, undisturbed, and unshaken. If you find yourself tempted to talk about your desire, pause. Ask yourself, why do I need to share this? Is it for confirmation? Is it because I doubt it myself and need another's belief to support me? If so, return to the inner world. Strengthen your assumption there. Build it up with feeling. Saturate it with conviction. Let it become so real to you that the outer world feels like the illusion and the imaginal feels like the truth. And when you reach that point, you won't need to speak of it at all. It will speak for itself in due time. This is the essence of silent creation. It is an act of supreme faith. It is to know that the moment you assume, the moment you feel it as real, you have set the entire universe in motion. Others may not see it, they may not understand it, but they don't need to. You are not manifesting for them. You are manifesting from your own inner conviction, and that is more than enough. Stillness is not inactivity. It is not the absence of movement, nor is it lifelessness. Stillness is alignment. It is harmony with the invisible dimension from which all things are born. Most people have been conditioned to associate progress with motion, believing that constant action, constant talking, constant planning will bring about what they desire. And yet the most transformative events in life occur in silence, without strain, without a word spoken. The inner shift, the silent decision, the quiet knowing, these carry more power than all the noise and effort in the world. When you enter stillness with awareness, you enter the heart of creation itself. There is a sacred realm within you that is untouched by noise. It is the place where assumptions take root. It is the point of contact between your soul and the universal law. And this contact does not require sound. In fact, sound can often drown it out. The loud mind, filled with worry, urgency, and fear, cannot hear the subtle voice of the unseen. But when the mind is quieted, when you become still, not just in body but in consciousness, you attune yourself to the creative current of life. You begin to receive impressions. You begin to feel the truth of your new state. And that feeling begins to crystallize into fact. You must learn to turn away from appearances. not out of denial, but out of recognition that they are old echoes. What you see now was imagined long ago, perhaps unconsciously, perhaps fearfully. The present is merely the harvest of past assumptions. To change your life, you must learn to ignore what is and give full attention to what is becoming. But that becoming is not found in the noise. It is not discovered in external reports or opinions. It is sensed in stillness. And stillness is not something you find, it is something you allow. You allow yourself to be still long enough to hear the truth of what you are imagining. You allow the picture in your mind to form without interruption. You become receptive, not to the world, but to the state you choose to occupy. Stillness is the key to this receptive state. When you are still, you are not asking, you are receiving. You are not seeking answers outside of you, you are accepting the answer within you. You are not reacting to the world, you are selecting a new version of yourself, and in that selection, everything changes. The outer world does not need to hear you say, I am changed. The outer world needs only to encounter your new vibration, a vibration born of silent inner conviction. And it is only in stillness that this vibration can be sustained without distortion. To align with the unseen is to act as if your imagination is the real world. And to do so convincingly, you must quiet the voice of doubt. Doubt is always noisy. It questions, it debates, it wants evidence. But truth is quiet. Truth does not argue, it simply is. When you become still, you stop feeding doubt, you stop rehearsing lack, you stop reinforcing the unwanted, and you begin to nourish the vision of what could be, not by effort but by presence. You sit with it, you feel it, you allow it to become familiar, and then, almost without your awareness, the unseen begins to shape the scene. Stillness is not passivity, it is the most potent form of participation in creation. It is the state from which all movement flows. To act without stillness is to act blindly, to rush forward without alignment, but to enter stillness first is to ensure that your actions carry power. One action from stillness is more effective than 100 taken in fear or urgency. One assumption from a place of inner peace carries more authority than 1,000 spoken out of desperation. When you are still, you are connected to the source of all that is. And in that connection, you do not force anything, you allow. This is the great reversal that so few understand. The world teaches effort. The law reveals that assumption is the origin of effort. The world says hustle. The law says be still and know. The world demands evidence. The law asks only for inner conviction. And when that conviction is formed in stillness, it becomes unshakable. It is no longer something you are trying to believe. It is something you simply know. And that knowing, though invisible, begins to harden into reality. The unseen dimension is not far away. It is not located in another place or time. It is here, now, accessible through feeling. But to feel what has not yet taken shape requires that you quiet the noise of the present. You must become still enough to feel the reality of what is invisible. You must enter the secret place where your wish is already fulfilled and live there as if it were more real than the world around you. That is the only way to impress the subconscious, not with repetition, not with shouting, but with stillness, saturated in belief. And so, the one who understands the law no longer panics. He no longer rushes. He no longer explains his process to others. He becomes still, because in stillness he finds power. In stillness, he aligns with the unseen, and from that alignment, the visible must obey. Not because he forced it, but because he assumed it. Quietly, persistently, and in harmony with the law that always responds. There is a paradox in manifestation that often goes unnoticed until it is lived. The law is most active when you are most silent. It is in the moment you relinquish the need to make something happen that the wheels begin to turn. The world has trained you to believe that noise, effort, and constant activity are the signals of productivity and change. But creation does not need your noise. It needs your alignment. It requires your still acceptance that the thing desired is already yours. In the silence of surrender, the law responds more swiftly and more accurately than in any shouted demand or anxious effort. When you try to make something happen, you are declaring, whether you realize it or not, that it is not yet so. Trying affirms lack. The very attempt to force or control implies that you believe the manifestation is separate from you. But the moment you stop trying and begin to rest in a state of already having, something remarkable happens. Reality begins to organize itself around your assumption. The people, places, and events that once seemed resistant or slow now begin to flow into your life, not because of what you did externally, but because of what you finally accepted internally. This acceptance does not come from repetition or convincing. It comes from silence. It comes from the moment you close the door to external senses, still your mind, and feel the truth of your desire realized. You do not need to explain this to anyone. You do not need to share it, defend it, or even speak of it. The power lies in the fact that you are no longer asking, but being. The inner shift from longing to possession is not noisy. It is subtle. It is quiet. And yet that quiet shift carries more power than all declarations made without belief. To live as if your desire is already yours without announcing it to the world is a mastery of spiritual law. It is the quiet confidence of one who knows how this law works. You do not broadcast your assumption to seek confirmation. You do not need others to agree with your vision. The moment you persist in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the law begins to act. And its actions are not always immediately visible, but they are always precise. In the silence of true assumption, invisible threads begin to pull together what is required to reflect your inner state. And they do so without noise, without struggle, without delay, save the time needed to unfold the scene perfectly. Stillness is not indifference, it is not laziness, it is the highest form of activity. Stillness declares, it is done. Stillness does not beg, it does not panic, it does not question. Stillness stands firm in the invisible and allows the visible to follow. When you are still, you are no longer sending mixed signals to the subconscious. You are no longer affirming and doubting in the same breath. You are simply being, and in being you allow. When the assumption is truly accepted, you stop looking for signs. You stop checking the world for proof. The inner knowing replaces the need for outer validation. That is the great sign, that you no longer seek signs, that you no longer wake up wondering when it will arrive. You know it must. You know the law cannot fail. And that knowing, unshaken and quiet, is the very soil from which all manifestations grow. The one who lives in silence while assuming has reached the point of spiritual maturity. He does not need to perform for others. He does not talk about his goals endlessly, nor does he rush to convince himself again and again. He knows that the law responds to the imaginal act that is accepted as true, and when that truth is felt inwardly, it is unnecessary to revisit it over and over. A single assumption maintained with conviction is worth more than 1,000 repetitions recited with doubt. Your external behavior may not immediately reflect the change you have made within, but that matters little. The law is not moved by outer appearances. It is governed entirely by the state you occupy. And once that state is assumed in stillness, the law moves, not with the clamor of sudden drama, but with the precision of divine order. The change may come through ordinary channels, through unexpected ways, through seeming coincidences, but it comes. And it comes because you stopped trying and started knowing. The world cannot resist the man who no longer resists the world. The man who has entered the state of his wish fulfilled no longer argues with reality. He no longer pushes against what is. He accepts what will be. And in that silent acceptance, he transcends the limitations of effort. His silence is not weakness, it is power. And that power does not need to shout, because it knows it will be heard. As you persist in your silent power of imagination, the world must bend. It cannot help but conform, for the outer world is not fixed. It is fluid. waiting on the internal commands you issue in the secrecy of your own consciousness. Most fail to realize this. They look at the world as if it is unchangeable, as if the facts surrounding them are final. But nothing seen is final. All that is visible today was first imagined by someone yesterday. And what you continue to imagine, if done with feeling and faith, must crystallize into form. The one who dares to persist in silence, who chooses not to argue with appearances, but to remain loyal to his inner conviction, will see the world transform. Without force, without conflict, without even a word spoken. The power of imagination is not in its loudness. It is in its fidelity to the unseen. You need not shout a new reality into being. You need not declare it to others or even repeat it endlessly to yourself. Once assumed and accepted in silence, it is done. You do not need the world to agree with your new identity. You only need to inhabit it. Persist in it, not with strain, but with quiet certainty. The persistence of imagination is not a matter of effort. It is a matter of dwelling. It is the act of returning again and again to the feeling of already being what you desire to be. It is a gentle yet unwavering loyalty to a new truth, even if all physical evidence says otherwise. Everything is drawn to the state you consistently occupy. That state may have no voice, no noise, and no external expression. But if it is accepted inwardly, it sends out a signal to the universe far louder than any spoken word. This signal, though silent, is the creative blueprint from which all future events take shape. You may not see how the pieces move. You may not understand how circumstances shift. But the Lord does not require your understanding. It only requires your assumption. And that assumption, if persisted in, becomes the force that reorganizes the outer world in your favor. You have experienced it many times already, whether you realize it or not. Think back to moments where something you feared kept occurring. You may not have spoken of it, but you held it in your mind. You felt it. You rehearsed it in your imagination. And the world, faithfully obeying the internal command, delivered it. The law is impersonal. It does not care whether you assume success or failure. It simply reflects the dominant feeling held in your consciousness. But the good news is this: you are not a victim of circumstance. You are a creator. And your most powerful creations are born not from outward action, but from inner stillness. The world rearranges itself in response to your persistent assumption. Not always suddenly, not always through obvious miracles. Sometimes the change comes slowly, through ordinary events, a chance meeting, a delayed decision, a forgotten phone call. These are not accidents. They are the invisible hand of the law moving in perfect response to the new self you've dared to become. And all of it is done without noise. The most powerful shifts in your reality often arrive without announcement. They do not require applause. They do not make a sound, but they are unmistakable. You are not required to track the process. You do not need to check on your manifestation like a gardener digging up the seed every day to see if it has sprouted. Your only task is to persist. Remain faithful to the imaginal act. Feel it as if it were already so. Let it become your dwelling place. And in that dwelling, you will begin to notice subtle changes. People will respond differently. Opportunities will arise unexpectedly. Obstacles will dissolve. But these outer changes are not the cause. They are the result of your invisible persistence. Most people fail not because they lack imagination, but because they lack persistence. They imagine once, then return to old habits of thought. They dip into the new state, but refuse to dwell there. But he who abides in the new state, who continues to return to it in thought and feeling, regardless of what the world shows him, he will reshape reality. The world cannot resist the man who persists in imagination. It must respond. It must conform. For imagination, saturated with faith, is creation itself. The more silently you dwell in your assumed state, the more protected it becomes. You do not expose it to contradiction. You do not seek validation. You simply abide in it, like a home you have moved into permanently. From this quiet place you radiate a new vibration, and this vibration calls forth every element necessary to externalize what you have assumed, not by willpower, not by external manipulation, but by the spiritual law that governs all things. It knows no resistance. It answers only to the sustained feeling of being. So let the world move. Let it change. Let it do what it must. Your responsibility is to remain in the state of the wish fulfilled, held in the silence of your own imagination. Let your silence speak for you. Let your assumption go ahead of you. And let the unseen shape the seen, not by effort, but by the quiet power of who you now are. You do not need to wait for permission to change your life. You do not need to announce your transformation, explain your desires, or justify your belief. The law responds not to noise, but to the quiet conviction that what you imagine is already true. In silence you assume, in silence you become, and in silence the entire structure of reality bends in obedience to your new identity. The world you see is not final. It is not fixed. It is the outpicturing of a past belief, an echo of a former self. But you are not bound to it. You are not at the mercy of conditions. You are the cause. And the cause lies not in action, not in speech, but in stillness. The stillness in which you feel, you accept, and you live from the state of your desire fulfilled. Creation begins and ends in silence. It begins with a quiet assumption and ends with the visible manifestation. All that lies between is illusion. You do not need to monitor time. You do not need to figure out how. You simply need to persist, not in effort, but in stillness. Let the outer world do what it will. Let circumstances rise and fall. Let appearances contradict. None of these things matter when the inner work is complete. Remain faithful to the invisible. Persist in the imaginum. Assume in the silence. And know that what is assumed in stillness must be made manifest in form. The law is certain. Your imagination is the creative center of all that is. Use it wisely, use it quietly, and you will manifest anything.